Some people get thrown away before they ever get a chance to bloom. Not dropped gently, thrown, like something that's spoiled in the pantry. The girl in this story was 18 the night her own family put her out on the road with one suitcase and a coat that didn't button anymore. No goodbye, no second glance, just a porch light going dark behind her. I was the rancher 2 miles down that road, and I want to tell you the truth up front. I almost didn't stop that winter. I almost drove past what was standing at my gate in the snow because I was tired and old, and I'd learned the hard way that the things you rescue tend to break your heart before they mend it. But 3 donkeys were standing in the storm that night. 3 shivering, half-starved, ridiculous animals nobody wanted. And what they brought to that girl's door, what they started, is something I've turned over in my head every winter since. If you've ever been cast aside by the people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever wondered whether kindness actually returns to the ones who give it, then stay with me. Because this one changed me, and I don't say that about many stories. The first time I saw her, she was arguing with a fence post. That's the truth of it, not the dramatic version, where I'd like to say the heavens opened, and I knew right then that Corrible Haze would change my life. No. She was standing at the eastern boundary of my property in a March wind that could strip paint, and she was tugging at a strand of loose barbed wire, cursing it under her breath in a way that told me she'd been out there a while and had run clean out of polite words. I keep a log, always have. My late wife Delia used to tease me about it, a leather notebook I carry in my coat pocket where I write down weather and calving numbers and sometimes things I don't want to forget. That night I wrote only, "Girl at the east fence, won't leave, something's wrong." I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the storm, because the storm is where it truly begins. My name is Elias Kane. I've ranched a stretch of high, mean country in the eastern shadow of the mountains for 39 years. It is beautiful land and it is cruel land, and those two things have never once contradicted each other in my experience. I raise cattle mostly. I keep to myself mostly. And by the winter I'm telling you about, I'd been keeping to myself so long that I'd started to mistake loneliness for peace, the way a man will mistake numbness for healing. Delia had been gone 4 years. Our boy, Tom, had gone to the coast for work and phone calls that got shorter each time. So it was just me and the dog and the herd and the mountain, and I'd made my peace with that. Or I told myself I had. Then came the February blizzard. It rolled in the way the bad ones do, quiet, almost polite, a soft gray afternoon that lied to you about its intentions. By nightfall the wind had teeth. Snow came sideways. I'd gotten the cattle into the lower windbreak and was on my way back to the house when I saw the shapes at my front gate. I thought they were calves at first, got out. Wrong. Ranchers know their own animals and these weren't mine. 3 donkeys. 3 of the sorriest, boniest, most pathetic donkeys I have ever laid eyes on, and I have laid eyes on a great many sorry animals. Their ribs stood out like the frets of a guitar. One had an eye crusted half shut. Their coats were matted and rimed white with ice, and they were pressed together in a shivering knot against my gate. 3 animals sharing what little heat they had left the way drowning people share a single plank. Now I want to be honest with you, because a story where the man is a saint from the first page is a story worth nothing. My first thought was not tender. My first thought was, I don't have time for this. My second thought was, somebody dumped these things and I'm the one who's going to have to bury them. People do that out here, drive their unwanted animals out to the last house on the road when they can't afford them anymore, and leave the burial to a stranger. I stood there in the wind with my hand on the cold iron of my own gate, and part of me, the tired part, the part that had gotten good at closing doors, wanted to leave them. But there's a thing that happens when you look an animal in the eye, and the smallest donkey, the one with the crusted eye, looked at me. Didn't bray, didn't flinch, just looked with that patient, bottomless donkey stare that has watched over mangers and carried the weary for 10,000 years, and I swear to you it was like being looked at by something that had already forgiven me for whatever I was about to decide. I opened the gate, got all three into the old barn, the one I hadn't used for anything but junk since Delia passed, rubbed them down with feed sacks, broke into the good hay. The little one, I'd started calling her Button in my head before I even knew I'd named her, leaned her whole weight against my chest while I worked, and I stood there in that freezing barn holding up a stranger's throwaway animal, and something in me that had been locked for 4 years gave a small, painful crack. I wrote in my log that night 3 donkeys, someone's cast-offs fed them, fool that I am. I did not yet know they had come from her. The days after the blizzard were the slow, blinding kind, all glare and drip and the groan of settling snow. The donkeys mended faster than I expected. Donkeys are tougher than they look, tougher than the people who abandon them ever give them credit for. And by the 3rd day Button was following me around the paddock like a shadow with hooves. And the big gray one, whom I'd named Sergeant for the way he supervised everything, had taken to braying at the sunrise like he personally approved of it. I put word around the way you do, called the feed store, asked the neighbors. Nobody claimed 3 donkeys, which surprised no one. But it was old Prout who ran the store down at the crossroads and knew every scandal within 40 miles, who squinted at me over the counter and said, "Skinny donkeys, you say, gray, brown, and a little dark one. Those be the Hayes animals. Girl was keeping 'em out behind the Hayes place. Family ran her off, what I hear. Ran the donkeys off too, I expect." Couldn't stand the reminder. "Ran her off," I repeated. 18 years old, Prout said, and he said it low like it shamed him to be the one saying it. "Middle of winter, you believe that? Whole family, church-going and all, put that girl out on the road with a suitcase. Talk as she was carrying, and no husband to show for it." He shrugged in the way small towns shrug at things too big for them. Folks can be hard, Elias. I drove home slower than usual. Carrying 18, put out in winter. And 3 donkeys that she must have loved enough that, even with nowhere of her own to go, she tried to keep them near, until someone drove them off too, into the same storm that had taken her. I looked at Button that evening, at the eye that had healed to a soft brown, and I thought about the fact that this animal had been someone's whole heart once, and had been thrown out for the crime of reminding people of a girl they decided to be ashamed of. I wrote in my log, "The donkeys were hers, have to find the girl." I found her at the east fence, arguing with the post as I told you. Corrible Hayes was small and sharp-boned, with a stubborn jaw and hands that had done more work than 18 years usually asks of a person. She wore that coat that didn't button. I'd learn later it didn't button because of the baby beginning to round her middle, and her boots were held together with baling twine. And when she saw me coming, she went rigid all over, like a rabbit deciding whether to freeze or bolt. "This is your land," she said before I could speak. Not a question, an accusation braced for. "I'm not here to steal, I'm looking for my animals. Somebody said 3 donkeys came this way and her voice caught and she hated that it caught. I could see her hate it. I'll go, I don't want trouble." "They're in my barn," I said. The whole of her changed. It was like watching a house get its lights turned back on. "They're alive. Fat and insolent," I said. "The gray one's taken over my whole operation. Come see." She didn't move at first. She stared at me with a suspicion so deep it had roots, and I understood it, because a girl who has been thrown out by the people who made her has learned that every open door has a price, and she was standing there trying to calculate mine. "I don't have money," she said. "I can't pay you for the feed. I can work it off, but her hand went, without her seeming to know it, to the curve of her belly, and then she snatched it away, furious at herself for revealing anything. "I can work." "Girl," I said, "come see your donkeys." She came, and when Button lifted her head across the paddock and let out a bray that cracked in the middle from sheer excitement, and came trotting to the fence, and Corrible Hayes dropped to her knees in the frozen mud and pressed her face into that donkey's neck, and made a sound I will not try to describe to you, because some sounds aren't meant to be described. When that happened, I turned around and looked hard at the mountain for a while, and let her have it in private. That's the thing nobody tells you about being an observer to somebody else's life. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is study the horizon. She wouldn't come inside. Not that first day, not the second. Pride like a fortress. So I did the only thing a stubborn old man can do with a stubborn young woman, which is I got more stubborn. I told her the donkeys needed tending and I was too old to do it right, which was a lie. I've tended animals since before her parents were born. But it gave her a job, and a job gave her a reason to stay that didn't require her to admit she needed to. She slept the first nights in the old barn with the animals, in a nest of hay and horse blankets, and I pretended not to know, and left a thermos of coffee on the fence post each morning, and pretended not to know she drank it. We were two people, building a bridge out of things we refused to say. Little by little I learned her. Not from confession, Corrible didn't confess. She leaked information the way a stone leaks water, one drop under enormous pressure. I learned she was clever with numbers. I learned she flinched at raised voices and went very calm and very quiet when she was most afraid, which is the opposite of what most people do, and told me plenty about the house she'd grown up in. I learned she loved those 3 donkeys with a fierceness that had clearly once been meant for people who hadn't earned it back. And I learned the shape of what had happened to her, though never all at once. There'd been a boy, a ranch hand older passing through, charm and empty promises. He'd gone before she'd even known there was a reason to tell him anything, and by the time the reason showed, he was 3 states away and unreachable, and Corrible had made the mistake, her family's word, not mine, of not being able to hide it, and the second mistake of not being sorry in the way they wanted her to be sorry. My father said I'd shamed them, she told me once, not looking at me, currying Sargent with hard, even strokes. My mother didn't say anything, that was worse. She just folded my clothes into the suitcase. Real neat, she always folded neat. Curry, curry, the donkeys were mine. I raised Button from a foal. I bottle-fed her. When Daddy said they had to go too, I thought the stroke stopped. I thought if I could just find where they'd wandered, I'd have something. One thing in the world that was still mine. I didn't say anything. I've learned that the wrong words at the wrong moment are worse than silence, and I'd said enough wrong things in my life to earn the lesson. You've got them, I said finally, and a roof if you'd stop being too proud to come under it. She smiled just barely, first one I'd seen. You're one to talk about pride, old man. She wasn't wrong. It was the donkeys that got her indoors in the end. Isn't that always the way, that the thing we're too proud to accept for ourselves, we'll accept for something we love? A late storm came through in April, not as bad as February but bad enough, and Button spooked and tangled a leg in old fence wire and cut herself deep. Corrible came pounding on my door at midnight, soaked through, terror all over her face, and there was no pride left in her at all, just a girl who needed help for the creature she loved. We worked on that donkey together till near dawn, Corrible holding Button's head and murmuring to her while I cleaned and stitched the leg by lantern light. And when it was done, and the animal was going to be all right, Corrible sat down on an overturned bucket in my barn and started to cry, not about the donkey, or not only about the donkey, but about all of it, the whole terrible year of it, the flood finally coming because something had cracked the dam. I made her come inside after that. Made her, in the way you make a proud person do something by refusing to make it a big deal. Put her in Tom's old room. Told her it was practical, that she couldn't tend animals if she caught her death in the barn, that I wasn't going to have that on my conscience. She said at the door of that room, not looking at me, "Why are you doing this?" And I thought about it. Honestly thought, because she deserved an honest answer and not a comfortable one. Because somebody threw away 3 good animals into a storm, I said, and it turned out they were the best thing to walk onto this ranch in 4 years. Made me wonder what else people had been too stupid or too scared to keep. I cleared my throat, which had gone tight. You're not a burden, Corrible. You're not the thing that ruins a good man's peace. Whatever they told you, whoever told you, they were wrong and they were cowards, and I'm too old to be a coward anymore." She went into the room and shut the door, and I heard her cry again, quieter this time, and it wasn't the same kind of crying. Some crying tears things down. Some crying washes things clean. A man who's lived long enough learns to tell them apart even through a closed door. I wrote in my log that night. I wrote a long time. But the only part I'll share with you is the last line, because it's the part that turned out to matter. "The house has more than one light on tonight. First time in 4 years. Strange how much I'd forgotten I missed it." By May, the ranch was a different place, and I was a different man, and neither of us had fully admitted it yet. Corrible worked like the land owed her money. She was good, too, quick to learn, tireless, and she had a gift with animals that couldn't be taught, only recognized. The donkeys followed her everywhere. The cattle settled when she was near. Even the dog, a suspicious old thing who'd never fully forgiven the world for existing, took to sleeping across her doorway like something worth guarding was finally back in the house. Her belly grew. She was quieter about it now, less braced for a blow that no longer came. Sometimes I'd catch her with a hand resting on the curve of it, and a look on her face that was equal parts terror and something that hadn't yet dared to become hope. "I don't know how to do this," she said to me one evening out on the porch, while the sun did its long, slow business of setting behind the peaks. "Any of it, a baby. I never had a mother who," she stopped, started again. "How do you love something right when nobody ever showed you how?" And I, who had loved a wife and buried her, who had loved a son and lost him to distance, who had spent 4 years believing my capacity for it had died with Delia. I looked at this girl the world had thrown away, sitting on my porch with her whole frightened future inside her, and I understood something I hadn't let myself understand. "You already know how," I said. "You bottle-fed a foal in the cold. You walked into a storm to find 3 animals that couldn't do a thing for you but need you. That's the whole of it, Corrible. That's all love ever is, showing up in the cold for something that can't pay you back." I looked out at the mountain because it was easier than looking at her. "You're going to be fine. That baby's the luckiest child in 3 counties and doesn't even know it yet." She didn't answer, but after a while her hand found my sleeve, just for a second, the way Button leaned against my chest that first freezing night, the whole weight of a creature learning it was safe. And I thought the hard part was over. I want you to remember that I thought that, because that's exactly the moment in every life I've ever watched that the ground decides to shift. The trouble came up the road 3 days later in a good truck, wearing a clean coat. It was Corrible's father. I knew who he was before he was out of the truck. You can read a whole household in the way a man walks toward a door, and Harlan Hayes walked toward mine like he owned the ground and was disappointed in it. He was tall, well-kept, the kind of hard that dresses itself up as decency. He had a Bible-black coat and a handshake he didn't offer me. And behind the polish, there was something I recognized from a lifetime of watching men, a person who had made a decision he couldn't undo and had come to make it somebody else's fault. "I'm told my daughter's here," he said. I stood in my own doorway and did not move to let him past it. "You're told right. I've come to take her home." Now I've been in my share of quiet confrontations, and I've learned that the loud ones are rarely the dangerous ones. It was very quiet on my porch. The wind had died. Somewhere behind the barn, Sergeant brayed at nothing, and it was almost funny, that stupid noble sound cutting through a moment stretched tight as new wire. "That's her decision," I said. "Not yours, not mine." His jaw worked. "She's my child." "She was your child in February," I said, "when you folded her clothes into a suitcase and put her out on the road in a blizzard. She was your child when you drove her animals off into the same storm to die. Seems to me a man gives up the word my when he does a thing like that. Seems to me you traded it." I saw it land. I saw the flinch he covered fast, and I understood then why he'd really come, not out of love, not out of shame exactly, but because the town had started to talk, and a man like Harlan Hayes could survive many things but not being talked about. Somebody had told him at church, maybe, that his cast-out daughter was living on Elias Kane's ranch, thriving, and that the story going around didn't paint the Hayes family as the righteous ones. He'd come to fix his reputation. He'd dressed it up as rescue. "You don't know what she did," he started. "I know exactly what she did," I said. "She got frightened and young and human, same as your whole congregation's done one way or another, and unlike most of them she couldn't hide it, and you punished her for the honesty of her body." I heard my own voice going hard and didn't stop it. "I buried a wife, Hayes. I've got a son who won't return my calls. You want to know what I would give to have a child show up needing me. And you had one. And you folded her clothes into a suitcase." That was when the screen door opened behind me. Corrible stepped out onto the porch. She'd heard. Of course she'd heard. And I braced because I didn't know which way she'd break, toward the fortress of pride or toward the terrible pull of the people who'd made her, that gravity that keeps so many folks orbiting the very ones who harmed them. She looked at her father for a long moment. "Hello, Daddy," she said. And then this is the part I've turned over most, all the winters since. She walked past both of us, down the porch steps, out into the yard where the 3 donkeys stood at the paddock fence watching with their patient ancient eyes. She put her hand on Button's neck, turned around. "You drove them into the storm," she said to her father. Her voice was calm. The calm I'd learned meant she was most afraid and pushing through it anyway. "You knew I loved them and you drove them out to die because hurting them was a way of hurting me. That's when I knew, Daddy, not when you put me out, when you did that." Her hand tightened in Button's coat. "You can hurt a person and tell yourself it's righteousness. But you can't drive 3 innocent animals into a blizzard and call it anything but cruelty. That was the truth of you. I finally saw it." Harlan Hayes stood in my yard with his clean coat and his undone decision, and for just a second, 1 second, I saw something break open in his face that might, in another man, have become an apology. A different story, maybe. A better one. But he was not a different man. "You're coming home," he said. "This is foolishness. Living off some old stranger's charity, carrying a—" "His name is Elias Kane," Corrible said, "and it isn't charity. It's the first honest kindness anyone's shown me in my whole life, and it came from a stranger and 3 donkeys and not one single person who was supposed to love me." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm not coming home, Daddy. I am home. Go on back and tell them at church whatever you need to tell them, but go." He looked at me, looked at her, looked at the ridiculous donkeys and the mended fence and the smoke coming up soft from my chimney, all the small proofs of a life being rebuilt out of what he'd thrown away. And he got in his truck and he drove off, and Corrible stood in the yard with her hand on the donkey until the sound of the engine was gone, and then her legs went, and I caught her, and she shook against me the way Button had shaken that first frozen night, the whole weight of a creature that has finally let itself stop bracing. "You did it," I told her. "You did the hard thing, the right one." "It doesn't feel like winning," she said into my shoulder. "No," I said, "the true ones never do. That's how you know they're true." The baby came in June, on the shortest night of the year, which felt like the land making a joke I appreciated. It was fast and frightening, and there wasn't time to get to town. So it was me and Corrible and an old ranching man's hands that had pulled 100 calves and never once a child. And I will tell you I was more scared than I have been at any point in a long and occasionally scary life. But some things the body knows how to do without asking permission, and near dawn, with the light just breaking gray over the peaks, Corrible Hayes brought a daughter into the world in Tom's old room, and the first sound that child made was a good angry howl that told me everything I needed to know about her prospects. Corrible held her, exhausted, wrecked, luminous, and looked up at me with tears running clean down her face. "I don't have anybody to name her after," she said. "Everybody I'm supposed to name a baby after, I don't want her carrying any of those names. I want her to have a name that means she's wanted." I thought about Delia. about how she'd have loved this, a house full of light again, a baby's cry, a girl worth saving saved. And I opened my mouth to suggest her name and then didn't, because it wasn't mine to give and this child needed to be her own beginning, not the echo of my ending. Name her something new, I said. First one of her line, let her be the start of the good part. Corrible looked down at the small, furious face. Hope, she said, trying it, then made a face. No, two on the nose. I laughed, first real laugh in longer than I can say. God help us, yes. June, she said, softer. For the month she came, for the light. She touched the baby's cheek. June Kane. I went still. That's not, you don't have to. You're the only father I've got that ever earned the word, she said, not looking up, in that leaking stone way of hers where the truest things came out sideways under pressure. If you'll have us, the three of us and 3 donkeys and 1 bad-tempered dog. A pause. I know it's a lot to put on a man who liked his quiet. I stood there in the gray dawn with my throat locked, and my log notebook a useless weight in my coat pocket, because there are things you cannot write down while they're happening. You can only stand inside them. I had 4 years of quiet, I said when I could. I don't recommend it. That was 6 years ago, near enough. June is a wild, clever, impossible child who talks to the donkeys like they're generals and refuses to wear matching socks as a matter of principle. Corrible runs half this ranch now and runs it better than I ever did. She's got the head for numbers I never had, and the town that once whispered about her now comes to her for advice on their own herds, and she gives it, and never once rubs their noses in the fact that they whispered. That's a bigger thing than forgiveness. That's grace, which is forgiveness that doesn't keep a receipt. Harlan Hayes never came back. I heard he left the church, or the church left him, the way those things get murky in the telling. I've made my peace with feeling nothing for him but a distant, weary pity. A man who folds a daughter's clothes into a suitcase has already sentenced himself to a punishment worse than anything I could wish on him. He has to live the rest of his life knowing what he had, and what he did, and that it flowered beautifully somewhere he was not welcome. Button is old now, gray around the muzzle, slow in the mornings. She still leans her whole weight against whoever will hold her, and June has learned to hold her, and I watch the two of them sometimes, the throwaway animal and the almost thrown-away child, and I think about how the whole of my late life turned on the single decision to open a gate in a storm. I almost didn't. That's the thing I need you to hear, the thing I've been circling this whole story to say. I was tired and old, and I had gotten so good at closing doors that I nearly closed that one too. There is a version of that night where I looked at 3 shivering donkeys and told myself it wasn't my problem, and drove up to my dark and silent house, and lived out my quiet years quietly, and died having never known Corrible or June or the sound of a child yelling at a donkey about socks. That version of me existed. He was right there, I could have been him. I keep the log still. Delia's tease, 40 years running. And I'll leave you with the last entry I wrote before I sat down to tell you all this, because I've never been much good at endings, and I think this one says it plainer than I could. Storm coming in tonight. Big one maybe. June wants to bring the donkeys inside the mudroom. Corrible says absolutely not. June will win. June always wins. 4 years I thought I'd lost my whole family. Turned out I hadn't lost it. It was just late. It was just coming up the road in the middle of a blizzard, wearing a coat that wouldn't button, looking for 3 animals nobody else wanted.